The Ebola virus is an illness transmitted from wild animals to humans that causes severe internal and external bleeding, organ failure, and eventually death. There is no known cure. The virus is native to Africa, where random outbreaks have been happening for decades. Scientists are working on a vaccine that could stop this deadly virus. Today I'm going to talk to you about the Ebola virus. Ebola is a very dangerous virus and has scared me ever since I heard it was in the United States. I first heard about Ebola on the news, and then I did a ton of research on it online for this speech. First, I will talk to you about what Ebola is, the signs and symptoms of it, and how you can get it. Second, I will talk about the outbreaks throughout the last decade. And lastly, I will talk about how Ebola spreads and how it is treated. The Ebola virus is an extremely dangerous disease that is very new to most people. Ebola causes severe internal and or external bleeding, organ failure, and according to PBS.org, 90% of the time, death. You might have heard of the Marburg virus, which is basically the exact same thing as the Ebola virus because it also causes hemorrhagic fevers. Both the Marburg and Ebola viruses are native to Africa. Africa has been experiencing these outbreaks for decades. The virus spreads person to person through bodily fluids or injected needles. Symptoms of Ebola are mostly irregular things that wouldn't make you think that you have the disease. Symptoms usually appear 8 to 10 days after you have it, but it could be anywhere from 2 to 21 according to cdc.gov. The symptoms include having a high fever, severe headaches, muscle pain, weakness, diarrhea, vomiting, stomach aches, and unexplained bleeding. Overcoming Ebola depends on your immune response, which is how your body recognizes and defends itself against bacteria. You get Ebola through contact with someone that has it. If someone infected with Ebola somehow gets any of their body fluids inside you, you are at serious risk of getting the virus. Even after a person with Ebola has died, the virus is still present as long as your blood, organs, and body fluids still have the virus. Basically, any physical contact with someone that has Ebola could put you at risk of getting it. I will talk more about this later on. Now that you know what Ebola is, I will now talk about outbreaks throughout the last decade. Most people think of Africa when they hear Ebola, which is partially true because that's where most of the outbreaks have happened. The Ebola virus got its name from a virus that started in a village that was near the Ebola River. WHO.int reported that the first cases of Ebola started in 1976 in Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo. After that, there were many similar cases, mainly in Africa and Asia. In 2008, Ebola was found in pigs in the Philippines. 4 framers got Ebola but survived from it. According to cdc.gov, an article from 2008 read this: "The threat to human health is likely to be low for healthy adults, but it is unknown for all other population groups, such as persons with underlying medical conditions or pregnant women and children." We now know that this is not true. Ebola can infect any living human or animal, healthy or unhealthy. The present-day outbreak in West Africa is the largest and most complex outbreak since it was discovered in 1976, as stated by WHO.int. The outbreak has affected multiple countries in West Africa. The official estimate of people in Africa that have died from Ebola is more than 3,000, but there is probably way more uncounted cases according to PBS.org. At the end of September this year, the first case of Ebola was diagnosed in the U.S. as claimed by CNN. Ebola in the U.S. isn't something you need to worry about as long as it stays contained. CNN reports that the first case in the U.S. was Thomas Duncan, a 42-year-old Liberian citizen. He flew from Liberia to the U.S. to visit family members in Texas. On September 28th, Duncan went to the hospital with common signs of Ebola such as a fever, vomiting, and diarrhea. Later, he was tested for the virus and he was positive for Ebola. On October 7th, his kidneys started failing and he died the next morning. Health authorities don't know how he got the virus. This has been the only death from Ebola on U.S. soil. Now that you're familiar with past and present outbreaks of Ebola, I will now inform you on how Ebola is spread and how it is treated. Ebola is easily spread from person to person, making it an extremely dangerous virus. There is also no cure for the virus. Ebola spreads through physical contact with someone who has Ebola. Dr. Amish Mehta, an infectious disease doctor at Emory University, states, that the virus can be transmitted with an infected person's vomit, blood, or other fluids contacted with another person's mouth, eyes, or openings in their skin. This makes the doctor's job very dangerous. Any physical contact in general is extremely dangerous. Ebola spread in West Africa not only from living people with Ebola, but also from dead people with Ebola. In West Africa, some families do funeral rites to their loved ones. These rites include washing their dead family members, touching them, and even kissing their corpses. Preparing someone with Ebola for the funeral can be just as dangerous as taking care of someone that is alive and has the virus. There is no cure or vaccine for Ebola, which freaks out most people. There are no licensed vaccines available yet, but 2 possible vaccines are going through human safety testing, according to WHO.int. The only thing that helps survival of Ebola is the treatment of specific symptoms, supportive care, and rehydration with oral or intravenous fluids. Today I first told you what Ebola was, the signs and symptoms of it, and how you can get it. After that, I informed you on the outbreaks of Ebola throughout the last decade. Lastly, I talked about how Ebola spreads and how it is treated. I hope that I have helped you learn more about what the Ebola virus is and what it does. In conclusion, Ebola is an extremely dangerous virus that has a very low survival rate.